I say this every so often, but I'm so glad we have kids in our church. The amount of churches in this country that don't have any children in it at all is sad. So, one of the hardest things a Christian parent can go through is going through the heartache of watching one of their children walk away from what they believe. Cheryl and I know we've had to do it. Jesus even told stories about it. He told the story of the prodigal son, didn't he? Which is not just a story of the son. It's a story of the father and the brother. It's a story of a family. I think it's inevitable during a time like that we ask ourselves some really hard questions. I know for myself, the question was, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? What could I have done? It's funny, our daughter Dane is only 22, but she's working at a drug and alcohol rehab facility. And she was assigned her very first person that she was supposed to shadow and help and encourage. And so they were together for a few weeks and things seemed to be okay. And then that person left early, like way before the rehab was done. And my daughter at 22 is asking herself all the questions that we normally don't get to ask until we're 50. What did I do wrong? What could I have done different to help this person so they wouldn't have left? Could I have said something different? It's hard when people that we care about, whether we're parents or not parents or just people in our lives, and they go in a direction, and it's hard when they don't go the right way. For me, I tended to pendulum swing between it was all my fault and it was all their fault, depending on my emotions of the day. I tended to go, oh, it's all my fault that they did such and such, and then no, it's all their fault. And the truth is somewhere way more messy than that. Ultimately, each person is responsible for themselves before God. No one else can own the decisions of anyone else. You can't do that. Yet, as I look back, and even as I look now, and I see some of the things that my children struggle with, even the ones that are walking with Christ, and yet they have sins they struggle with, and I see myself, and I wonder how much of that I contributed. How much of my bad habits, how many of the mistakes I made impact my kids? And that's on me. This is a hard topic. And I know that those of us old enough to have children who have left home know about this self-doubt. It is not my desire this morning to heap guilt on anyone. So just so you know, I'm not a big fan of guilt, actually. Guilt doesn't motivate us. It tends to just demotivate us and send us, I'm a fan of conviction. Conviction is that energy to do better, to change, to move forward. So just so you know, I'm not a huge fan of piling on the guilt, and I don't plan on it. But the theme of how the actions of one generation impact the following generation is actually really, really clear in this passage. And so we're going to look at this idea. We're going to look at both a positive example and a negative example of how generationally the things we decide to do impact the next generation. Some of you only have grown children. We'll talk about that. There's still things we can do. Some of you do not have children and may never have children. There are words in here. There's one of the positive example is about you. Some of you have children at home still, and I pray that today's sermon will challenge you to make your parenting as effective as possible while they're still under your roof. Lastly, some of you still are living with your parents. Maybe. I think my daughter's the only one left in the room. Hi, it's for you. I'm Blake. There we go. Blake was like, shoot, it could have been just Eden. Addie's back there. All right. Well, I hope that today's sermon will increase your patience with your parents. You're never going to believe this. Nobody grew up in a perfect home. Not one person grew up in a perfect home. And so if you're going to blame your folks and then decide to walk away from God, you're the loser. And why are you the loser? Because Because salvation is for you. Salvation is, you have everything to gain by accepting God's free gift of forgiveness and hope. Don't allow the problems that inevitably happened in your family cause you to reject what God's offering. Don't do that. So having said all that, let's review where we are in the events of Abraham's life. Jesus himself showed up just a few days ago to tell Abraham and Sarah that by the same time the following year, Sarah would have a baby. It's not the first time they received a promise kind of like that, but it's never been quite this specific. It will be Sarah, it will be this year, it will be now, it is immediate. This is the strongest and clearest the promise has been so far. Immediately following, 2 angels went to the city of Sodom to warn Lot and his family to flee because God was going to destroy it. There's an amazing video on YouTube about finding the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. The people who found it were not Christians, and yet it's really fascinating how it really confirms the biblical account. If you'd like to see that video, come see me afterward, and I'd be happy to give you the link for that, or contact me some other way. So Lot and his 2 daughters, 2 of his daughters, out of at least 5 kids, leave the city. And then even out of those 4, only 3 make it out safely. And that's where we pick up in Genesis 19, 27 through 29 is where we're going to start, just those few verses, and then we'll keep going later. Now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. I highlighted that part about God remembering Abraham. That may seem small. That's actually super important. We're going to talk about why that's super important. The reason Lot was sent out of Sodom was because of God's relationship with Abraham. That's what that's saying. It doesn't say that God remembered Lot's loyalty. It doesn't say that God remembered Lot's faithfulness. It doesn't say anything about God's relationship with Lot. It talks about God's relationship with Abraham, and because of that relationship, Lot was given an offer. And it was an opportunity, not a guarantee. If you were here last week, you'll remember that at least 10 people were offered salvation. And if you were here last week, you'll remember that at least one of those people was desperately wicked and didn't deserve salvation, that they were offered it anyway. And those 10 people, all of them, the offer was made for Abraham's sake, because of Abraham's faithfulness, because of Abraham's relationship with God. 10 people received a very specific personal offer for salvation. Some of them took it, some of them didn't. For those of you who don't have children or only have adult children, please note that Lot is not Abraham's son. Abraham cared about Lot, but he was not Lot's father. So here's an interesting question. Is our relationship with God and our concern and care for others such that God would make sure someone in this world was at least offered salvation for our sake? You follow where I'm going with that? Because that's what God did for Abraham. Abraham's relationship and his faithfulness and his walk with God was such that for Abraham's sake, someone else was offered salvation, was shown. Messengers were sent specifically. I don't know how more specific God gets when he sends angels to come tell you and to walk you to the edge of the city and say, go. I mean, that is a pretty specific call. Rewriting verse 29, someday could it be said of us, thus it came about that God remembered, fill in your name, and called, fill in somebody else's name, out of darkness into salvation, because you prayed for them and your faithfulness and your relationship with God. Who would God call out for your sake? And I'm not even talking about you witnessing to them personally. I'm talking about God honoring your relationship with him in a way that meant he provided the means of salvation to someone else. You know, Lot was in a place Abraham couldn't safely go. We talked about what Sodom was like. It was dangerous. To go to Sodom and to be a stranger was to invite attack. It wasn't safe. Abraham couldn't even physically go into the place, and yet, because of his faithfulness, God did send a messenger into the place Abraham could not go. Is there someone in your life that you can't go where they are? You can't go to where they are. They have rejected, they've walked away, they're wherever they are, and you can't get there. That doesn't mean God can't get there. God can get there. Don't give up hope. Don't quit praying, and don't quit being faithful in your concern and care for them. God can get there, even if you can't. Do we realize that our personal walk with God matters to that level? We tend to be so selfish in our thoughts about our walk with God. We tend to think very much in terms of, I'm walking with God right now and I will reap these benefits in the future. It's actually so much bigger than that. I will walk with God now. Who else will be impacted because I walked with God? Who else can be changed? Who else will be saved? Who else will be better? Who else will live different because I walked with God? We don't get so wrapped up into what does it just mean for me if I do what I'm supposed to do. I have to say, I think our personal walk is far more important than how often we tell our kids how to become a Christian. We can tell our kids 500 times how to become a Christian, but if we're not walking it and there's nothing worthy to follow, why would they listen? Who we are matters. I'm going to use a very personal example. I've used this before. My grandmothers and grandfathers, all four of them, all dedicated their lives to Jesus. 4 people. So far, there have been 3 generations old enough to commit their lives to Jesus from those 4. The 4th generation is mostly babies. There's a 4th generation. They're a little small. Out of those 3 generations, 62 out of 68 people are definitely saved today. (62 out of 68). There was a time when God remembered Helen and Ralph Stark. And he led their children to safety. And then God remembered Dwayne and Prinny Stark. Will God remember Keith and Cheryl Stark? Will God remember us in a way that he calls those we care about? How much of good parenting boils down to not so much what we did, but who we were? When I gave that example, though, I did say 62 out of 68. I didn't say 68 out of 68. Why? Were they not good enough? Well, let's look at Abraham's numbers. God remembered Abraham and offered salvation to at least 10. He walked 4 of them all the way to the city. Even out of those, only 3 were saved. Abraham, the man of great faith, was 3 out of 10. But don't focus on that. Focus on this. Due to Abraham's great faith, 10 people who lived in a horrible, horrible, horrible place received an invitation from God's personal messengers who would go into darkness and even be attacked for it. And yet, because of God's power and grace, they were not actually in danger. God sent messengers into darkness, specifically 10, because of Abraham's faith. That's amazing. That is all we can ask for, because God doesn't force people to do things. And since this is all we can ask for, it becomes what we ask for. God, would you help me live my life in such a way that others might be given a special invitation to follow you? We can't ask for the outcome. We can ask for the moment. Because you chose to remember me. Now that's the positive example. Now we have a negative one. All right, so. Thank you, Addie, for keeping up with my slides. All right, next verses. And Lot went up from Zoar and stayed in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. And he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Then the first one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. I'm going to assume everyone kept up with what just happened there. Just a few things. I mentioned earlier in Genesis that it says Noah got drunk, and that took some time. See, Noah got off of an ark, and there wasn't instantly a vineyard, right? It took 3 years or more. I did some research. That's about how long it takes to get vines to the point where you can actually make wine out of it. So these things don't just happen. Likewise, Lot and his family left Sodom with whatever they could carry. It seems unlikely to me that the first thing they did was trade everything that they were able to carry for so much wine you could go on a binger. That seems pretty unlikely. It seems far more likely that if they got drunk, they'd planted a vineyard. It'd been time. I lean towards the 3-year or later option. So 3 years without seeing another man other than your father might be a little discouraging if you're hoping to find a husband. I can understand discouragement in that. The second thing we need to talk about is the whole father-daughter thing. As creepy as it sounds, it was likely far less of a big deal then. Please remember that Adam and Eve's kids had to marry each other. Abraham is married to his half-sister. All the way through this story, no one ever even mentions it at all. It's not considered weird. It's because they're close enough to Adam and Eve at this point that there's not that many people in the world. It's not weird yet. It's going to be another 1,000 years before God gives a law that says you can't do that. I tend to think that the main reason for that law is genetic defects, and it became dangerous, and you're going to have birth defects, and it was going to be bad. So I tend to lean a little bit less into that side of it. But this thing is not okay. This is not okay for several reasons. The one I want to specifically point out, though, is what do we call it when a man fills a woman with enough drugs and or alcohol that she is unable to resist him or even remember that they had sex? What do we call that? Rape. That's what we call that. That's rape. His daughters raped him. That happened. That's not okay. I don't care what other spin you put on it. I don't care what other stuff I don't care what, it doesn't matter, any of those things. They raped him. He neither gave his consent nor he was willing, obviously, or they wouldn't have had to do the alcohol thing. He did not want to do this. Why would they even imagine or think to do that? Why? Well, because their father chose to raise them in a culture where it was normal for people to treat each other that way. That's why. They'd lived there 23 years. They may have been born there for all I know, and if they weren't born there, they had grown up their entire lives watching out the window, seeing what people doing to each other, and it became normal. It doesn't matter what happened in the house. Everywhere else, this is the way people acted. Most of the people in their world thought that forcing someone else to have sex was normal. Lot could have done something about it, and he didn't. He didn't move. He didn't leave. Notice also that his girls were saved from destruction. They made it out of the city, but they were not saved from the damage done to their minds. They were not saved from the damage done to their sense of normal or their sense of moral. The moral confusion of Lot's children was Lot's fault. It was. He chose to raise them in this environment where they were constantly exposed. It is completely understandable why, as adults, they would be very confused about what was and was not okay. The principle, again, takes me back to the idea of who I am being more important than what I teach. I'll bet Lot taught his daughters to be moral, but his actions said that he valued the benefits of luxury more than the separation from sin. What he tolerated in his life was more important than what he said. And all this winds back to something I preach about every so often, a principle that we see at play in the Bible over and over. Salvation by grace is free, but you still reap what you sow. We still reap what we sow. Salvation is free. That doesn't keep you from reaping the consequences of your actions. That's different. Consider King David. God shed his grace on David freely. He chose David. David's the guy. He gave his spirit to David and never left him. Notice that it says, I don't have the verse here, but if you remember, it says, God gave his spirit to David forever. Then he commits adultery and murder. It doesn't say his spirit left him, but there were some serious consequences to the rape and the murder, or the adultery and the murder. There are consequences. We reap what we sow. There are no victimless crimes. There are no victimless crimes. There's no such thing. There are no secrets from God either. Every single time we deviate from God's design, there is a cost. And we like to think that the cost is only personal. And this goes right back to what I was saying about our virtue. See, we think our walk with God, and we think very selfishly, I walk with God now and I'm going to get this benefit. And we don't realize that when I walk well, there's a benefit to others that's huge. Likewise, I think my sin is secret. I think my sin only affects me. I have this very closed thought that somehow I can do these things and it doesn't impact anybody else. That is always wrong. It is always wrong. The things we do in secret that we think impact no one else impacts other people. So what should we do? Well, it depends on which of those people I listed earlier as to what it describes of you. If you're a young adult, if you're a young adult, take your actions seriously. There are things I did as a young man that I thought were free things. I thought, I'm doing this as a young guy, and it simply won't matter in the future. I was wrong. It did matter in the future. There were things I struggled with years later, and I had no idea that doing this thing, this one time, would be plaguing me 10 years later. I just didn't know. So I'm telling you, you will do things, and it will matter. Things that you thought wouldn't matter will matter. They will haunt you. So be careful. And they won't just matter to you. They will matter to friends, spouses, other family members, kids someday if you have kids. It will impact in ways you just can't predict. So be careful. Choices have costs. If you still have kids at home, live your faith. Don't allow pet indulgences to live in the shadows. Look, if you drink too much, ever, your kids know. And they're paying attention to why you did it. They're paying attention to whether you drank too much because you had a really bad day at work or things were stressful and whatever, and then you drank too much. And they are programming right now what the proper response is to too much stress. They're learning it. If you drink too much because that's when you have a good time, they're learning that too. They're learning right now, I'm going to have a good time. I need to drink too much. You are programming your kids. If we eat too much, we're programming them with that too. We are programming our kids with what we do. We are teaching them their future coping mechanisms, whether we like it or not. Do we allow TV and movies with casual sex? Don't be surprised when our kids think it's normal. Why would they listen to me talk about sex on a Sunday morning when all the normal, healthy, regular people on the TV and the movies have sex whenever they want? Why would they listen to me? If you let your kids grow up in an electronic Sodom and Gomorrah, don't be shocked if they grow up just as confused as Lot's daughters. There is so much garbage out there. And if we just let them wade around in it, don't be surprised what happens at the end. That's what happened to Lot. But what about if our kids are grown? I mean, it's the damage done. And let's make sure we level the player field, like I said, the playing field. I've rarely met a parent who thinks they did a perfect job. And the few parents I've met that think they did a perfect job, we don't agree about what perfect means. I've met a few, and then they tell me how they parented, and I was like, okay, whatever. We see habits and struggles in the lives of our kids, and we often wish we could have done better. I have a verse for you, and it may seem really scary at first, but it also includes hope. This is Deuteronomy 5, 9, and 10. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. I want to highlight the bottom because somehow we don't get there very often. We get stuck on the top part and we worry about cursing our kids or living under some other curse. And we don't get to the bottom about how, but he also shows mercy to thousands. That's an important part too. The rest of the Bible and human history proves the first part of this verse. Lot's daughters will become the nations of Moab and Ammon. These two groups have the closest language to Hebrew of any other cultures, maybe with the Samaritans being another group that's very, very close. These two cultures will also, you'll be shocked to hear this, these two cultures will be forever known for their sexual immorality. Shocker. Hebrew men throughout history, even into the Maccabees, if you know what the Maccabees are, it's not in the Bible, but it's reliable history, reference that Jewish men had a hard time with Moabite women and Ammonite women, and often married them. Probably a combination of the languages being close enough that they could talk, and the sexual immorality bit, which made them fun. Lot and his daughters escaped the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. His daughters became Moab and Ammon. So consider this verse from Zephaniah 2:9. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Moab shall become like Sodom, and the Ammonites like Gomorrah, a land possessed by nettles and salt pits and a waste forever. The remnant of my people shall plunder them, and the survivors of my nation shall possess them. It all is going to come back. They escaped Sodom and Gomorrah only to create cultures that would become Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. That's depressing. Lot may have ultimately been a righteous man, but his children were not. We could say third and fourth generations. The truth is it goes far, far more than 3 or 4 generations. But don't forget the second part of Deuteronomy 5, 9, and 10. That part right there. Don't forget that. But showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. One of the things that we hold on to as Christians is God's ability to bring good out of evil. I'm going to show you some good coming out of evil right now. You may know that Ruth, of the book of Ruth, was from Moab. Ruth was a descendant of rape and immorality. This is her heritage. This is Ruth's heritage. She came from this. Yet Ruth chose to love God and keep his commandments. Ruth was King David's great-grandmother and ultimately part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So let's be clear. God purposefully allowed this event that we just read about Lot and his daughters to be part of Christ's genealogy. It's in his story. It's connected to Christ. God can take any evil and bring out ultimate good. And this is where we have to pin our faith. That even when there is no deserving, even when there is no reason to think anything good can come out, God still can make good come out. And this is where our hope is. Talk about showing mercy to those who love God and keep his commandments. You know, the verse says only thousands. That's not enough to explain what happens through Christ. So from this one verse in Deuteronomy applied to our passage in Genesis 19, we discover both a third and fourth and far more thousands that fall away and thousands and millions that are blessed. We never know the long-term impacts of our actions. But here's the thing. Let's go forward 2 slides again. It's never too late to adjust course. It doesn't matter what mistakes we've made in the past. Today, love God and keep his commandments. Today, love God and keep his commandments. Today, love God and keep his commandments. Today, lean into your faith and live true to your calling. Today, work toward having that relationship with God that is so strong that for your sake, God would bring the offer of salvation to the people you love one more time, and then another time, and another time, and another time. You never know which time will be the one that they realize how much they need Jesus. You just don't know. And it's not over till it's over. It's not over till it's over. So, whether it's a child you're praying for, or a nephew, or a niece, or a friend, or a person, you don't have to be a mom or a dad to understand this. You just need to be a person who loves somebody else to understand this. And as those of you young enough to still be young, let me just urge you to care about who you are, because it will change your future. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, it's so encouraging and amazing to realize that what you did to save Lot and his family was because of your love for Abraham. And this gives us hope. It gives me hope. It gives me hope. Lord, would it give other people in this room hope? That they wouldn't quit praying. They wouldn't quit pressing in. They wouldn't quit caring about who they were. They wouldn't give up. Not because we can force anyone to do anything. We can't. Because you're a God who loves his children so much that for our sake, you will ask them one more time. You'll extend the offer once again. God, would you send messengers in our place? God, do we even dare to ask angels, would you send into darkness your messengers into places we can't reach, no matter how dark the place is that the person we love about is in, no matter how much we feel we can't get in there, there is nowhere you can't go. And so we just rest and we hope and we cling to the truth that you can go everywhere. It is never too dark for you. And so, Lord, we're counting on your grace. We're asking you to do what we cannot do, to say what we can't say, to offer what we can't offer. We love you. We place these people in your hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.